Something else that I wanted to discuss this week was to use JavaScript to interact with CSS and the DOM. And you can read more about how you can use it, and we can read more about the syntax here. But we will be mostly learning from this throughout our DOM challenge that you can find on the website. And so we will more specifically be using what we learned from last week, where we talked about how to listen to events from elements like click. And we want to apply these rules like add, remove, toggle, and all of these things to uh, change the class that is being applied to uh, some element, and basically change how it looks and allowing the user to interact with how that element looks. So if you click on the Edit with JS Field button, it brings you to a page like this. And so what we have here, if I zoom a little bit, what we have here is in the same window, I have an HTML, some CSS, and the JavaScript that will be applied to the same page and will create the result that I have on the right. And so I want to, so you can read the instructions here, and generally what we want to do is we want to be able to click on these two buttons here. And by clicking on these buttons, I want to change the background color of the element that I have here. So if you were to look at this, it says we want to add the JavaScript code to make these changes based on the button selected. And when we press yes, we want to add the class success and remove the class failure like this. And when we press no, this button here, we want to add the class failure and remove the class success. So by adding these two listeners, we want to be able to click yes and no and see the changes affecting the color of this element here. So since we only need to work with HTML and JavaScript for this example, I'm going to make the CSS a little bit smaller. And so basically what we want to do is to first get a reference to these elements to be able to interact with them. And something that has been added to JS Fiddle is you also have access to a console here. But if that doesn't work out very well for you, you can also use the console that is provided in the browser. So you will see the result of your JavaScript being shown there as well. So let's make sure that everything is working here. So I'm going to log something and save the file by pressing Ctrl S, and you can see that this refreshes here. Now, if I were to open the console, it says hi. So generally everything seems to be working. And I also see hi here. So as I said, if this doesn't work for you, you can check the browser's console. So the first thing I want to do is get a reference to the yes and no buttons. So what I can do here is I can say const yes button equals, and then use document.query selector to select this button. So let's take a look at our HTML structure to see how we can get a reference to this element. So to get a reference, I can look for the btn-success class, which seems to be unique in this page. So in this page, I'm looking for .btn-success. Since this is a class, I added the dot at the beginning, and then we have btn-success. And then I want to try and log this to make sure that I have the right element. So this seems to be too long. I'm going to open this up, and you can see that this returns reference to the yes button element. So this seems to be working so far. So I want to have the same logic. So I'm going to copy this. And we have the btn-danger here. And this one says no button. And again, we can log that out to make sure that we have a reference to that element. And since I have some text here and it's not null, it means that the reference has been successful. All right, so what I want to do is listen to the events of clicking yes and no. So what I can do is I can use one of the number of ways that we talked about to write some event handler. So I can just do add event listener. And we want to listen to the event click and have a function that will be executed here. And let's start with printing out yes clicked to make sure that everything is working all right. So when I click this, it says yes clicked. So it seems everything is working. We can do the same thing with the no button. So I'm going to do something very similar just to make sure that we have the correct handlers here. So we have yes clicked and no clicked. So everything seems to be working fine. Just note that if you want to save your progress for later, you need to sign in before continuing. So make sure that you do that. All right, so I have a reference to yes button. I am able to listen to the click event successfully. And so now we can write some code to do the changes that we want to do. We also need a reference to this result item to be able to change its classes and change the effect that is being applied to it. So I will write something very similar, result element equals document.query selector. And then I'm looking for a class of result. And notice that I use query selector versus query selector all because I'm looking for only one element at a time in my code. If I wanted to select many elements that match some query, I would use query selector all, but here I need to use query selector. And when the yes button is clicked, I want to add to the class list of result element, class list.add. And to learn more about it, you can come here. And so basically similar to an elements style, we can use its class list property, and it has a number of methods. One of them is add, one of them is remove, toggle, contains. We have different things that we can use here, but let's stick with add for now. And we'll add the class success to the result element. So let's see if it worked. When I click yes, you can see that it changes colors, so it definitely did work. But we can also inspect this element and see that its class right now, instead of the initial result that we had in our HTML, is now results space success. So it has two classes now. The first one is the one that we added using HTML, which was result. And the second one is added using CSS, sorry, JavaScript. So if I were to refresh, look at this and take a look at the result. Now I'm going to click yes, and I want you to see the effect on the result element. So when I click on yes, you can see that the class success has been added here. So my code seems to be working perfectly so far. Now, as we discussed, we want to add the class success and also remove the class failure. So if we want to do that, we need to use the second function, second method that we have accessible to us on this class list, which is remove. Again, remove removes one or more class names from the element. So we want to remove the class failure like this. And generally, we want to do exactly the opposite when we click the no button. So we want to remove success and add failure. So let's do that. Save the file and let's close the console. And you can see that this reaches the effect that we wanted it to. We wanted to change its color when we clicked on yes and no, and you can see everything is working here. So this was an example that you could use to learn more about Query Selector, how to listen to events and modify how a specific element looks uh, using JavaScript. Now, what I want you to do after watching this video is go through the CSS here and take a look at how it's handling some things, how it's making these like center aligned, how it is changing its size, the size of these elements, or give them like these round corners, and try and see if you can achieve the same thing yourself using CSS using only by copying only the HTML from here and writing the CSS yourself.